I want to thank Luminar Neo for sponsoring this video. Up until this point, I have resisted picking up a Leica camera. That's mainly due to my serious case of gear acquisition syndrome. But seeing all of the hype on YouTube about them, I finally caved and took the Leica Q2 to Italy, where I got to experience it for the first time. As a FUJI X100v owner, I would like to share my thoughts on what it was like. But first, I want to share some of the photos that I captured with the Leica Q2. And I apologize in advance for filming this video on my iPhone while I was in Italy. I was robbed of $16,000 worth of equipment, and the only camera that I had left to film was my phone. These first set of portraits were shot in Venice, Italy, on what they call a gondola, where having a 28mm f1.7 fixed lens made a lot of sense. You know, I've heard so many people praise how good this lens is, and my God, the colors, the micro contrast really stood out to me when I was reviewing these images. This is the straight out of camera image. Now to edit it, I used Relight AI, one of my favorite tools in Luminar, along with adding some layered fog onto the water using Atmosphere AI. When I'm shooting in beautiful locations and I'm only using natural light, one of my favorite ways to pose a model is by asking them to look up to the side while pulling on their hair, kind of as if she's in awe with the scenery. Now, when I want to get more of a moody vibe or expression from a model, I tend to ask them to give me a curious or even a worried expression. That usually does the trick for me. When editing this photo in Luminar, I chose one of their portrait presets, and these are not like regular presets. These presets make multiple adjustments to an image, and what's really cool is that if you don't like something that it did, you can go into the edit tab and remove it altogether, or just make a quick adjustment to it. The first thing I wanted to do was insert an artificial sky, but make it look as natural as possible. Luminar makes this really easy to do. The lighting in this image is coming in from the left, and what's amazing is if I adjust the position of the sky, the lighting effect also changes with it. The masking refinements have gotten so good, it's become a breeze to blend in these skies seamlessly without any haloing around the edges. Now to make this look real, I defocused the sky because the background is also defocused. I added some atmospheric haze because it brightened up the image, and this is not a dark image, it is a bright image, so it goes along with it. And also just increasing the brightness overall, I think that it all kind of blends in really well. To finish off the image, I added some glow, which is becoming one of my favorite things to do to an image. It adds just a little bit of a dreamy look, takes away that clinical sharpness of an image, and just a little bit of skin retouching, a little skin smoothing, didn't hurt nobody. When I shoot urban portraits with a wider focal length, I tend to shoot from a lower angle because of the distortion that it can cause to someone's face. I also like to ask the model to slightly bend at the hip towards the camera so that I can keep her face on an even plane with the camera. One of the most versatile poses you can ask a model to do is what I call the L pose. One arm wrapped around the belly and the other one either flared out or grabbing onto the hair. Let me show you how I edited this photo in Luminar. I chose the same preset as before. That's flawless. I think it gives a really nice, simple and clean look. I'm just gonna go ahead and tone down the body slimming that this preset did in the editing tab. I immediately cropped out the guy on the left, and then I turned down the saturation of the blues. And I do this a lot for my urban portraits because concrete usually has a lot of blue hues in it, and I want it to appear more gray. Now in their portrait tools, I brightened up her face a bit, I made her eyes pop a little more, and I added some skin smoothing. The trick to making Luminar's skin retouch feature look better is to create a mask and then remove any of the blur that might have gotten on any of her facial lines or features. Prior to using the Leica Q2, I heard some negative things about its autofocus. but I didn't have any issues with it. The only real quirk that I noticed was that the face and eye detection wouldn't activate sometimes, even though she was close and looking into the lens. For this next set, I put the Q2 into AF continuous mode and asked Kayla to walk in the middle of the street while intermittently looking back so that I could catch her hair swinging around. She could have probably stood still and did this, but I think that it just looks more natural if she was actually moving.
Again, go ahead. Again.
This was probably my favorite edit. I really wanted to get a moody look out of this one, so I chose Nostalgic Haze as a preset. Just like the last image, I like to desaturate the blues to make the concrete look more gray. I use Relight AI to darken up the background a little bit. I use Atmosphere AI to add some realistic looking fog behind her. Low key, that's a really underrated feature in Luminar. I rarely use Mystical, but I liked it how I gave this image a dreamy blur effect. I did a little face and skin retouching, just like I did in the last image. I went back into Relight AI to make the background a little bit more dark and moody. Now, I normally wouldn't add fake blur to an image, but Portrait Bokeh really does an amazing job, and just using the sliders, it makes it easy to adjust the edges and feather it to make it look real. Now, to finalize this image, I added some glow to soften up those highlights behind her. Now, looking at the before and after, man, it just pops off the screen. If you want to check out Luminar Neo for yourself, check out the link in the description. This really is a great tool when you want to get creative with your edits and not spend hours in Photoshop doing everything manually. I know the Leica Q3 is the most relevant Leica out right now, but unfortunately, I could not get my hands on that one prior to the trip. So I still think that using the Q2 is still gonna, this video is still gonna be relevant because I'm not going to focus on the technical aspects of this camera. It's been done for years and years already, but instead I'm gonna focus on my user experience. This is my first time ever using a Leica, an X100v owner, so I'm gonna try to approach it from that angle. So the things that I liked, I've always heard about the prestige and status, right? One of those things that come with owning a Leica, and I kind of understand it now. So I don't know what it was. Maybe it was because I was in Italy, but I never got so many compliments, random compliments on this camera. People standing next to me, completely unassuming, waiting to cross the street. They see the red badge, I'm holding the camera. They're like, nice Leica, or a nice camera. I used to have this, and this, I thought that was kind of cool. Now, the minimal design of the Q2, the less it is more approach, is probably one of my favorite parts of using the Leica Q2. So I'm definitely a sucker for a clean, minimal design, which is why like cameras like the Leica M11, the SL2, and even the Hasselblad X2D, those are on my bucket wish list of cameras because I just love the design. Now, there is just something about using a camera like the Q2 that makes me feel like I'm using a camera, not a computer, Like the X100v is my favorite go-to walk-around camera, capture memories, of my daughter and everything. But it does have a lot of buttons and dials everywhere. And although I like having those options of quickly adjusting something, I'm constantly accidentally bumping, turning a dial or doing this or doing that. On the Q2, all you get are 3 buttons on the left-hand side, a small D-pad that you can use to navigate the menus and move your focus point around, or you can touch the focus. There's also this little button up top here that's pretty flush with the camera. You can use that to simulate other focal lengths, which I found to be very handy, especially when you're shooting for the crop. I'll touch on that later though. I think that the EVF is really big and bright. The rear screen is nice and sharp and the photos look great on it. The one issue I did run into was the battery. Now, not the battery life. I think the battery life is pretty good. The official Leica charger was in my carry-on that was stolen. So there was no other way to charge this battery because it doesn't have USB-C charging. And I'm glad they addressed that with the Q3. But, when I was in Italy, I was forced to use some third-party rinketing charger that required me to manually like line up the pins with the battery. It's really funky, but it got the job done. And without that, I wouldn't have been able to even make this video. Another thing about Leica that people rave about online is the image quality, and specifically the one coming out of this lens. So I recently learned that this 28mm f1.7 Summilux on its own would cost around $7,000. I don't know how true that is, but so essentially getting a Q2, Q3 is actually a good deal. Even though it's a lot of money, it's a good deal because you're essentially getting a free camera, which I'm not gonna lie, that's exactly what I would tell myself to justify this purchase. But for real though, the lens design is so unique, and how it doubles down as a macro lens by turning this right here, and it's just so smooth and it's honestly genius. The optical quality of this camera, it did blow me away. The colors were rich with tons of micro contrast. I'm not saying this because I've heard other people say it. I'm saying this because the images do look different when you zoom in. Similar to the Sony RX1R, which has an older Sony sensor, but it has a fixed 35mm f2 lens. There was something about those images that was just different than an interchangeable lens camera, where the images, it's almost like because it's so like fine-tuned, the camera sensor, just the whole process is fine-tuned, that you get a more rich, you just get better image quality. And I seen that with this camera, and I see what all the fuss is about. The images are really nice coming out of here. With the Leica Q2, it has a mode where it can simulate other focal lengths, which essentially is just cropping into the image, but it gives you lines, right? So this option actually makes a big difference when you're shooting with intention, right? So it's one thing shooting knowing that you're gonna crop after the fact, but when you're able to tangibly see lines so you can compose your shot, it honestly makes all the difference. Now, I do think that this is something that I would use more on the Leica Q3 because the resolution was bumped. But I did try to take a couple photos with the Leica Q2 in the studio, cropped into 50mm, which would be giving me around a 15 megapixel photo. And look, results are definitely usable. They're usable, but if I'm posting to social media, but it's something that I would rather like not do. I would rather avoid and get more resolution, but in a pinch, I could use this in the studio at 50mm. Honestly, I think I'd be okay. So some of the things that I didn't like. This lens makes the camera a little bit more front heavy than I originally thought. Unlike my Fuji X100v, where the lens is almost like nearly flush with the camera. I guess because people online are always comparing the Fuji X100v to this camera, I'm thinking that it's compact. It could probably fit in your coat pocket. I don't think this will fit in a coat pocket. This is, don't get me wrong. It's still a very small form factor, especially for full frame, but it's still quite larger for an everyday shooter if that's what you're looking for. Now, just like the X100v, using this camera without some kind of third-party grip or accessory isn't going to cut it. There isn't anything to hold on. It's not comfortable. Even though this is kind of grippy here, you need some kind of thumb rest or some kind of extra grip. The autofocus of the Q2 isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm one of those autofocus snobs. I have all the higher end full frame cameras. I know what great autofocus looks like. I know that it was supposed to be improved on the Q3, but to be honest, I didn't miss many shots with the Q2. At least when I was in single AF mode, right? So I'm accustomed to always shooting in continuous mode with my mirrorless cameras. It's hard to miss a shot like that. Tracking is amazing, but I do notice that when you're in continuous mode on the Q2, it's gonna hunt and post a little bit. So staying in single shot, it did great. The face and eye detection would sometimes not activate. Sometimes it would work and then it would just stop working. Even when her face is clearly visible in the frame looking right into the camera, it would just stop working, and then just start up again. That would happen. But overall, I think that it's, I'm not buying this camera because it has blazing fast autofocus, just like the X100v. I don't think that it's a deal breaker at all. So is the Leica Q2 worth $6,000 or Q3 worth $6,000? Because they're not that much different. Okay, I'm gonna say that I'm trying to choose my words wisely here because I know people are ready to like, what are you gonna say? I think that for $6,000, if you're buying the Q2 only because it has amazing image quality, I don't think that it's worth $6,000. I think that the only way to measure, to justify the $6,000 price tag are by factors that are not found on a spec sheet. So what I mean by that is, if you want great image quality, you can get great image quality nowadays with a full frame mirrorless camera. They come in really small packages. Get a 30, you can get a 28, a 30, you can get a wide angle lens, and you can save so many thousands of dollars if that's all you're looking for. But I think that the majority of people that pick up a Leica Q2 also care about other things, like the prestige and the status that comes with owning a Leica. The less is more approach, where you don't have to think about, what lens do I want to put on my camera today? You pick it up and you go. This camera allows you to just focus on the craft, on photography, and it just makes you actually want to shoot. And a lot of people, they struggle with that. And sometimes, unfortunately, it takes a very expensive tool to kind of reignite that fire and that passion again. This is the kind of camera that can do that for you. So if that is what you're looking for, I do think that it's worth it, given all of the little tricks and how much of a premium but classic experience that this camera gives the user. Okay, so the second question that I kind of want to ask myself, that I want to answer: would this camera, if I owned it, would this camera replace my FUJI X100v? Let me get my X100v so I could hold it up. I've seen videos where people are comparing these cameras online, which is fair. These are, smaller fixed lens cameras, but it's different on video. In the real world, there is a pretty big difference here. I'm not gonna lie. This is a pretty, this actually can fit in pockets, cargo pockets, jacket pockets. I think that this camera is still so much more versatile as an everyday carry, and also can inspire you just like this camera can. Now, one of the advantages of the Fuji for me is that as an everyday carry, I don't always want to edit my photos. Yes, I still shoot in RAW and JPEG, but most of the time I just use the JPEG because the JPEGs are really nice, especially with the film simulations on this camera. So this camera still, no other camera can replace the X100V for me, for the size, the weight, and the workflow that I don't want to have, so I just want to use the JPEGs coming out of here. The Leica does have a couple tricks up its sleeve. It does have, you can import profiles on here, where you can kind of do the same thing with Fuji, where you can, the JPEG will have a profile that you like, So again, what you want a pocketable camera, or you want a camera that you don't mind, hanging around your shoulder. I think that the Leica and the Fuji can ignite that fire, that passion with your photography. And I feel like that those are one of those intangibles, one of those things that's hard to put like a price tag on, or set a value, set value to. Obviously, these cameras you have to overpay for one of these nowadays. The Leica, you could, you're paying $6,000. But at the end of it, I can see what the fuss is about. I can see why people are hyping a camera like this up on the internet, because it's about how it makes you feel. And that's why everyone is so passionate when they talk about this camera. It is a thing of beauty for sure. So